So let me talk a little bit about that darkness. And I kind of talked about in that opening of how it started and the first time it happened to you, this abuse that you suffered. Now I'm going to go back to this article that you wrote. And here we go. Again, this is from a 5-year-old. I was confused mostly. I don't think it ever crossed my mind to tell my parents. I just knew that I had been instructed not to tell anyone, so that's what I did. I really didn't understand what he had done or why, but I definitely knew that what had been done was wrong, and it might be something that I would be punished for. From that moment on, my life became one big game of cat and mouse. I tried to avoid him, and he pursued me and took every opportunity to get his hands on me. He had plenty of opportunities because he was a beloved and trusted family friend. Even right in front of my parents and other people, he would regularly slap my butt and pull me onto his lap. I would always squirm away as quickly as I could. I remember being left home with him. I remember throwing fits and begging to go along with my mom and my sister. My mom just thinking I was acting out and being a brat, and would tell me to stay with him until they got back. The fact that no one realized what was happening by simply observing the situation still bewilders me. So this guy, like you said here, this guy had full access to your house, full trust of your parents. Why is it that you think, or expand, you kind of talk about it a little bit, but what is it that makes a kid hold that information in when something bad is happening like this?
So I think it started happening with me when I was so young that I didn't understand it. I did not understand what was even going on. No one had ever told me that something like that might happen. And I was told not to say anything by an adult, and so I didn't. And I think I definitely had a feeling that I knew something was wrong and that this was not what should be happening. But a lot of it was probably just my personality type. I was a shy, quiet kid, and I wasn't inclined to express my emotions that much anyways. And I think people who do this sort of thing, they look for a specific type of kid. They're not stupid. They know how to single out just the right kid. And that was me in that time. And I had a lack of understanding of what was even going on. I didn't really know that it was definitely something that I should tell other adults.
And I'm thinking that in your situation, in your upbringing, you're seeing nature, right? Mm-hmm. You're understanding that pigs are having babies. I mean, you're seeing this kind of thing take place, but it wasn't something that your family talked about, the birds and the bees or anything like that. Just didn't come up.
Yeah, not really. And definitely not in. I think that it's hard for people to believe that their best friend or close family members would ever harm their children. And so I suspect that my parents felt like they kept a pretty good eye on me and that I was fine because they didn't look where they needed to look.
I think that's, and I'm sure Echo has some kind of bias, psychological bias for this, but anytime you're in a situation where there's something that you simply could never imagine and couldn't believe, and if something that you could never imagine and couldn't believe happening, and you're not being told about it, what would plant that in your mind, to make you think that it's going on? From your parents' perspective, it's like me looking at one of my close friends. I would never have that thought, and so where would it come from? And you kind of see how it would not.
And you'd probably think that your kid would let you know if there was a problem, right? You would be like, well, I would be able to tell if something was wrong because my kid would let me know somehow. And that's not necessarily the case.
I'm going to go back as you continue this, back to your writing here. We moved into our own house, and I would have some moments of peace. But he was always around, always visiting, and even parked a trailer on our property to live in for periods of time. He stalked me like I was his prey. I never, ever felt safe from him. He would watch me constantly. I would look up from playing with toys and see him standing in the doorway of my bedroom, staring at me. I would wake up to him watching me. When I would have friends over, I would suddenly jump up and announce that we needed to go outside and play right now, because I would notice him watching us through a doorway or a window. Again, I can't even imagine what that had to feel like for a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old. And again, I picture my own children and their pure innocence that they live in, thankfully. And I can't, I mean, this is like a horror movie. You're a kid and you're looking up and you're playing with your toys and you're reading your book or whatever, and you look up and you see this predator, just stalking you all the time, and the discomfort that you had to just feel constantly, and no way to escape it. Do you think was there anything else that you can think of that you tried to do or tried to send a signal, or were you just so sort of enveloped by the situation that you didn't, just like I was talking about, maybe your parents couldn't imagine what could be happening? Was it like you just couldn't imagine this not happening?
Yeah, pretty much. I think because it started when I was so young, it just was part of my life. And it was so consistent. It wasn't like something that happened and then didn't happen it was just like a daily part of my life. And so I don't think I really ever tried to signal. I remember one time there was a couple girls, some friends of my parents came and visited, and they had a couple girls a little bit older than me that came. And I remember the one girl who was probably 12 at the time telling me they spent the night, they slept outside, and she told me that when she woke up in the morning, my abuser had crawled up onto her bed and started touching her leg, and she jumped up and told him no and ran away. And she also didn't go tell a grown-up. She came and told me that this had happened, and I remember telling her what happened to me. And that's the only time as a child that I ever told anyone. And I remember us sitting there kind of discussing this. I was probably 8 maybe at the time. And we're like, well, I don't know why he does this. That's weird. I don't know, and we just kind of discussed it and then never told anyone, even though she was even older and hadn't grown up with it. And I don't know if later on she told someone, but at the time she definitely didn't go tell her parents or my parents or anyone, which reaffirms the fact that your kids aren't necessarily going to tell you. I
know with my kids, if they do something that they think is going to get them in trouble, especially in that 5, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, they're not going to tell you. They don't volunteer that information if they think it's something that they did wrong or think. So that's another little trap that occurs. Back to your writing here. He was old and was missing all of his teeth. He wore dentures sometimes, and sometimes he didn't. I remember him pinning me up against walls and counters and kissing me with his soft, toothless mouth and fingering me with his dirty hands. I wanted to vomit. I would never tell him no, though. Never tell him to get away from me. Never acknowledge that he was doing anything to me. I would just slip away from him as soon as an opportunity presented itself and mumble that I was going outside to play or down to the rock piles, my secret labyrinth of tangled blackberry brambles and boulders. He would follow me to the top of the trail saying things like, "Come back, you like what I'm doing." Or, "I don't think your mom wants you to go down there while she's gone." But he never followed me down into the rock piles. It was my safe zone. It was the place I could cry with no one seeing me. I remember someone accusing him of molesting another little girl. I heard my parents talking about it, and then my dad pulling me aside and asking me if Mike had ever touched me. I was caught off guard and totally unprepared to deal with what saying yes would mean. So I said no. As soon as it was out of my mouth, I wanted so badly to change my answer, but no one ever asked me again. I'm convinced that if I had had a little time to think and had been asked again, I would have spilled it all. Remember that. It's important. But at the time, I said no, and the woman who made the accusation was discredited as being crazy or a drug addict and having ulterior motives. And that was that. So there's a clear example. And I could see now, going from the perspective of a parent who's all uncomfortable to go up and ask this question in the first place. You know, it was probably the weakest form of questioning too. Yeah. You know, like, has Mike ever made you feel weird? And no. Okay, he's good. Yep. Now good. Dad's like, okay, see, I told you this is no issue. She's a liar. She's a drug addict. And
they want that answer. They want to hear no. Yeah. Any parent wants to hear no when they ask that.
And yet, you got to ask again. You got to put it probably in multiple different ways of asking the question. Not just does he make you feel comfortable, does he touch you? You got to ask that in so many different ways to open up the mind of the kid. You know, obviously without asking leading questions, you know, that's gonna put somebody, you know, in another weird situation. Yeah. How do you ask your own kids?
So I think that you have to talk about it casually, hopefully before something happens. Make them aware of the fact that this does happen. And people think that they're protecting their kids by not telling them that horrible stuff happens. They feel like they're protecting them by shielding them from this. And meanwhile, their kids are being molested and don't know how to tell anyone because no one's talked to them about it. And so you can start talking to them when they're really young, use simple terms, and express that sometimes people do bad things, and there's something. I tell my kids that there's something broken in some people's brains that makes them do something that normal people don't do, but that they're out there.